Good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Frances Cooper. I'm President and Director of Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, and it's my honor and privilege to welcome you to our program this evening on behalf of the staff and board of our library. I always have to say, please make sure you've silenced your cell phones so that we can all enjoy the presentation, which I think is going to be fantastic because I had an opportunity this morning to spend some time with Giorgia, and she really is very engaging and really fascinating. So at Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, as part of our strategic plan, we had an area of focus within it that we called measuring our impact and telling our story. And that's really the genesis of this project. We felt that we needed, as a library, to understand what impact the work we do had on our community. What should we be measuring, what should we be counting, and what does it mean? And once we figured out all that data, then we need to align that with data about our community so that we know where we align. And if we're going to do that, we need to develop the capacity in our staff that they can understand and analyze data and make good decisions about the programs and services we offer. And if we're going to develop the capacity in our staff, we also have an obligation to work with our community and help the people that we serve understand how they can use data to make decisions that impact themselves, their families, their work, their school, their community. And if we're going to help our community understand how they can use data in that way, we also want to make sure that they can protect their data, that their privacy and confidentiality is not compromised in this world where everything about all of us seems to be known. So we were fortunate enough to get a grant from a local foundation to actually help spur this work because it's pretty complex. Among the things that the grant paid for actually is the program this evening, but we also use that to bring in someone to really help us as an organization and as a community understand data, and that person is Eleanor Tutt. Eleanor started with us in February. She has spent the last 10 years working with community leaders, helping them to analyze and understand data to make just and equitable decisions for the people that they serve. And she firmly believes that if you're going to use data to make decisions about a community, you need to involve the people who are impacted by that data. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So you can see she's the right person for this work. She's already embedded herself in the data community here in Pittsburgh. She's a real asset to our staff, and I'm going to bring her up now to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, welcome. As Mary Frances said, my name is Eleanor Tutt. I'm the Open Data and Knowledge Manager here. And again, as she mentioned, the library is currently in the midst of a grant-funded program to model ways that we can all use civic data in an inclusive, participatory way to influence sound decision-making and enhance public life in Pittsburgh. I'm thrilled and humbled to have Giorgia Lupi here speaking tonight to usher in our next year of work. When we thought about the values we wanted to bring to our data work, we knew that it was important to make clear that data was ultimately about people, that in order for data to serve communities, we had to recognize the humans within the numbers. Giorgia Lupi's work, including her book Dear Data with collaborator and friend Stefanie Posavec, brings that humanity to data in a way that is playful and beautiful. Dear Data involved the two friends drawing and mailing their everyday data on postcards. The project is personal. Data about their own human actions, the sounds they heard, the times they complained, the food they ate. Yet, while personal, the project is also an invitation. The process of deciding what data to explore and committing to noticing that data is a fun and creative way to think about your life. Additionally, the act of participating in your own version of Dear Data is a form of information activism, a reclaiming of your personal data and an affirmation that you are the best person to collect, frame, and sometimes even be surprised by the data that tells your story. We deserve agency over our own data and our own stories. The stories you tell may be intimate ones about the friends you see or the feelings you experience. Or you may choose to tell stories, perhaps in partnerships with others, about the strengths and challenges within your communities. So I want to say, and you probably have a card already, but an easy way to start exploring your personal data is by being our data pen pal. And the library was inspired by the Dear Data project. We have blank stamped postcards you can grab on your way out, and if you send us one, we will send you a data postcard back. And I know when I first saw Giorgia Lupi speak at the I.O. Festival, I left inspired to draw my own personal data, so I hope you will be too. Giorgia Lupi is an information designer, artist, and author. She is the co-founder and design director at Accurat, a research, design, and innovation firm. Her work has been featured in publications such as the New York Times, Wired, Brain Pickings, and Print Magazine. And she has won many awards, most recently the prestigious Lezioni di Design Prize within Design Week, Milan 2016. Finally, I'm also happy to announce that when I met Giorgia at the airport yesterday afternoon, I learned that the Dear Data postcards were just acquired by MoMA and will become part of their permanent collection. So basically, she's wonderful. You all wanted to applaud there. And so please welcome Giorgia Lupi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Eleanor, for such a flattering introduction. I'm really excited to be here tonight to present the Dear Data book, but also my approach to the data world. But just a little bit about myself before I get started. So I am an information designer, but I was originally trained as an architect. As Eleanor said, in my day job, I run a data visualization design firm that is called Accurat, and we are a team of 25 design and developers split between Italy, my home country, and New York, where we started an office a few years ago. And what we do daily is we design and build visual tools and experiences that help organizations, big and small, make sense of information. In my practice, regardless the final output, I work with data in a very handcrafted way, I would say artisanal way. I focus my research on new visual languages to represent data to make them hopefully more humane, more contextual and engaging. And sometimes this handcrafted approach to data produces kind of artifacts that are not necessarily what you would expect data set to be represented on, such as in this project I've been working on for the Malaria No More organization, where data has been used as a material to produce a narrative scarf telling the story of the fight against malaria over the last decade. So I sketch a lot with data. It is my way to make sense out of numbers without limits imposed by software presets. And I draw with data not only because I myself cannot code, and these visuals that you're seeing are some of the steps to create actual visualizations from sketching to translating data from Excel to Adobe Illustrator in a very manual way, which is how we work. So, but I use really data, drawing with data as an asset. I like to say that I draw with the data I am working on in my mind, but not in my pen. And I personally find drawing with data as an invaluable tool to discover what is unique on the numbers that you have at hand. It also can raise new questions about the data itself, because in fact, a lot of times, as in the example that you're seeing, this limiting practice helps to reveal new possible analysis to perform. Instead of being overwhelmed by the size of a data set and by millions of numbers, we focus only on their nature, their organization, and their deep meaning. So a couple of years ago, I had the pleasure to meet this woman, Stefanie Posavec, with whom I discovered I had so many personal and work similarities. We're both expat. I am an Italian living in New York, and Stefanie is an American living in London. We're both the same age. I'm not getting into details here. We're also both only children, so very self-centered and self-absorbed. And well, our lives have also many other similarities that I'm not gonna bothering you with, because most importantly, we both work with data in this very handcrafted way, a pretty unique approach in the data world. We both prefer drawing to coding as our entry points for our data, and in general, we are both obsessed with sketching with data. So we thought we absolutely had to collaborate, and we decided to challenge ourselves, since we only met a couple of times in our lives before starting Dear Data. Is it possible to get to know another person through data and drawings only? Well, we tried. And we conceived what we called, of course, Dear Data, a project that practically took out all of our evenings and weekends for over a year, a zero technological year-long project where every week and for a year we use our personal data to get to know each other. So our personal data around weekly shared mundane topics, from our complaints to the interaction with our partners, from the compliments we received to the sound of our surroundings, from our negative thoughts of the week to our obsessions and habits if they showed up. So 52 pretexts in form of data to investigate and reveal a particular aspect of our days and of our lives. Personal data that we would then analyze to find the most compelling story of the week, then manually hand-drawn on a postcard-sized sheet of paper that we would then post on the mailbox to the other person with our fingers crossed. So data postcards open for all to see that will travel from London to New York and from New York to London every Monday for 1 year. And eventually the postcard arrived at the other person's address with all of the scuff marks of its journey over the ocean, where the Postal Service has really been the real third party in this collaboration, as our cards often carried not only our visual representation of the week, but also one of their travels over the ocean. So we purposely designed initial constraint for the postcards. The front of the cards contain no text or explanation at all. It is a hopefully beautiful drawing that one could just take as an illustration if you didn't know that there's data behind it. And the back of the postcard contains, of course, the address of the other person, the title of the project and of the week, and the legend, so how to read our drawings, where we every week abstracted our visual choices to let the other person understand what was in the data, what happened on that week. And we didn't send any digital scan of our postcards, and we are both really have been eagerly waiting to get the data weekly portrait of the other person in the mailbox for over a year, also rediscovering the pleasure of checking the postbook as you get home. It has been a type of slow data, small data, and incredibly analog data transmission. So during a time when everybody talks about big data and virtual reality, we of course do small data and physical postcards, you know. Well, yes, it doesn't sound very revolutionary, but by removing technology from the equation, we were really forced to extend ourselves as designers. Because on the one hand, we have each been forced to invent and create 52 different visual languages, because hand drawing with data, of course, leads to designs that are incredibly tailored and specific to the data that you're working with. But also, removing technology and the computer from the equation triggered us to find different ways to look at data as excuses to tell something about ourselves. In fact, as we gathered our weekly data, the process was definitely more labor-intensive than just deriving standard metric from a technological device. We conceived Dear Data from the beginning definitely more as a personal documentary than a quantified self-project, because we here didn't only quantify numbers. We have been adding qualitative details to our data collection. For example, the very first week of Dear Data, we chose a pretty cold and impersonal topic. How many times do we check the time in a week? And the answer is insane, by the way. Well, so here is the front of my card, and you can see that every little symbol represents all of the time that I check the time, order per days and per hours chronologically. Nothing really complicated here. But you see in the legend how I added anecdotal details about these moments. In fact, the different instances of my symbol indicate why I was checking the time. What was I doing? Was I bored? Was I hungry? Was I late? Did I check it on purpose, or I just casually glanced at the clock? And this is the key part, giving Stefanie an idea of my days through the pretext of our data collection, something that is not possible if you don't actively add meaning to your tracking. Because a data set can lead to many stories. And this is why, as we did with this project, but in general, I really believe we have to reclaim a personal approach to how data is captured, analyzed, and displayed, proving that subjectivity and context play a really big role, especially when data is about people. And this led me to reflect upon our second week, where we tracked our walks and transportations through the city. And here we turned the moves, the movement tracking apps on to gather this data. And it was actually the first and last time where we used an external app to automatically track us. In fact, even though we both added other information about our path to the city, we also agreed that it felt we weren't much in control of the primary data set. It felt impersonal to be tracked by an app as opposed opposed to personally tracking our data. So as the weeks progressed, we mainly explored themes requiring manual data collection, focusing on what computers cannot gather, or at least not yet, and trying to move beyond what was possible, what was expected. Because we can find data also in our minds and in the words we use, and not only in our activities, which is actually even more compelling if the goal is telling something about yourself through your data. So on week 7, we checked our complaints. And I composed this musical complaints card, borrowing a very literal visual inspiration from the music notation system to show the repetitiveness of my complaints of different types over time, and their level through the positioning of my complaints notes over the verticality of each chord. Like, did I truly need to complain? Explaining to Stefanie how to interpret my protest, and being very honest about how grumpy I've been in the true spirit of sharing, as you can see from the type of complaints that my mouth couldn't help but put it out in the word. And well, in the Dear Data book, which you've already seen some pages of, we also made a step further, and for some of the week we revealed to each other and now to all of our readers the minutiae of our data collection, our actual data collection, such in this double page, which is right after the complaint cards, where I disclosed every single one of my protests, my original data collection. And this is another very important aspect of this project for me, because over a year we shared with each other the geekiest and most vulnerable aspect of ourselves, our flaws, our bad habits, even shameful revelations from our past and from our minds. And over a year we connected at a very deep level with each other, learning to love each other's imperfection because we could relate to them. And we have never been scared of sharing with the other person, or now with the world, our flaws in form of data. Because there's nothing shameful in admitting, for example, that I'm envious of all of you guys, native English speakers, or of people who are more charming than I am, or that sometimes, a lot of the times, I feel that I'm not enough, or that I have dark and depressed feelings about the future. This is part of who I am, and actually this is how a human being looks like. And we've also discovered from how the book has been received so far that a lot of people are writing us to comment on some specific aspects of some postcards that they can relate to. And most of these aspects, or most of the times, are not the most flattering ones. Because actually I believe that people don't relate to perfection, they relate to humanity. So as the weeks went on, we began to gather data on all of the parts of our lives, including weeks that you wouldn't want your parents to see, like our drinking habits for a week, or even our swearing, or our negative thoughts, which was actually quite a difficult one to do, and which made me realize the power of using data as a tool to investigate your mind. Because on the one hand, addressing your darkest sides, your trickiest matter, your obsessions in form of numbers, and having to count them and report them, helped me not being afraid of them anymore, because in a way they became data. The sort of objectiveness that counting implies gave me the opportunity to, in a way, overcome the fear of addressing those tricky topics. But also, on the other hand, data, with its power of classifying, of categorizing, is an incredibly helpful tool because it forces you to identify things clearly, especially with your thoughts and emotion. The exercise to not only stop and acknowledging when they're popping up, but to having to somehow categorize them, describing the type of thoughts or emotion that you're feeling since they have to become data, is a powerful tool to help you grasping these ephemeral moments, and then to also be able to have this type of skill in your mental toolkit. I really find it powerful and possibly promising. So as the project evolved, since we really wanted to push forward what can be data, we also figured that we can even find data beyond the daily tracking and, for example, make a survey of what we own. Walk into our closets with the eyes of a data collector and looking for data in the way we categorize and classify our garments, so their colors, the way we organize them, how often do we wear them, which, if you think about it, is a quite interesting thing that is very telling a lot about a person. And well, what it tells about me is I have a lot to learn from my boyfriend, well, at the time boyfriend, now husband, which, as you can see, clearly has a much more optimized strategy when it comes to his outfits. Anyway, But going on, we also figured that we can try to use data to become better human beings for at least 1 week, to perform acts to be able to then report them, like this week where we purposely smiled at strangers and tracked their reaction, like if they smiled back, if they pretend they didn't notice. And that was a very interesting week where I found myself walking in Brooklyn over the bridge on Manhattan, trying so hard to catch the eyes of the people I was running to and smiling. And trying to smile very nicely, even if sometimes I realized it wasn't really easy to put together a nice smile. And I can tell you that this is one of the things that sticks with me the most, even after more than 1 year that the project is over. I definitely do smile more, and I still definitely am much more aware of my surroundings and the interaction that I have with people. Which brings me to share with you what I learned the most on a personal side from this project, how to pay attention. Really how to be incredibly more aware of my surroundings, of the people I interact with every day, and of my behaviors. Because if you think about it, so many things happen around us, and we all have blind spots in our field of vision or like gaps in our stream of attention. And sometimes we even cannot answer the simplest question, like, where was I last week at this time? How many people did I spoke to last evening at the party? How many things I bought yesterday? And also, we generally have such a very poor sense of the time we spend doing these things. I don't believe that we cooked Dear Data in the beginning as a self-improvement project in the first place, but it surely turned out to be sort of one of this kind for me, because the slowness of this weekly half-hour that we have doing for a year produces sort of like slow and meditative behavior. It has been for me a real sort of meditation, because by having to stop and acknowledge what happens at any given moment, you're more aware of the present, you're more in the present. And actually, I believe that you really can accept this present more, because acceptance comes from acknowledgement. So if we can force acknowledgement, we can get closer to acceptance. And besides, for how we imagine the format of the project, addressing one topic at a time, it really helped us to stay focused on it, deeply investigating it, which also helps us building richer memories for the future. Like, personally, I've never been able to keep consistently a diary in my life. Well, I've tried many times, but I never succeeded longer than a couple of weeks. But with Dear Data, while drawing my data postcards, I have been actually drawing a visual diary of my year, a source of very precise memory. Because week by week, my memories are filled now with vivid images from my year, from that particular year. And what happened is evoked by the visual clues of my postcards. A week was marked by the topic, by the Sunday morning drawing, and by the ritual of posting my card. It has been like keeping a diary within a weekly rhythm, where the time unit of the 7 days help you also telling your story in a less impulsive way than on a daily diary report. And over this year, Stefanie and I shared our data diaries, and we used this tool, this material, to compose a portrait of the other person through this fragment of her nature in form of data. And now the two of us are very, very close. We communicate daily, more than daily. We look for opportunities to travel and spend time together. We are definitely thinking about like doing other projects together. We really became close friends through our data. So the answer to, is it possible to get to know another human being with data only, to me is definitely yes. But we could do that through our data only because we've been working in this very manual and personal way, adding contextual details to our logs and thus making them truly personal about us and us alone. Even when the subject was simply called, like as you've seen the first week where we tracked our clocks, looking at the clock, or again, when sharing how grumpy we've been over a week of complaining, you saw how we didn't only count the numbers of complaints, but we enriched our data with the reason from the complaint, their level, to really make these logs about us and us alone. Because again, data, I said that before, is a tool that filters reality in a highly subjective way, and data has a unique power to abstract the world, and it can help us understand the world according to different relevant factors every time. On a professional level, this year of intense, laborious data collection also helped us to crystallize and formalize what bringing this manual and analog approach to data and data visualization to an extreme level taught us as professionals. Because in Dear Data, we found that this very small human scale we've been working on has opened the idea of data to a wider audience and made it more approachable. We've been able to engage with so many people outside the community. Because we both found that with previous projects, it's often difficult to get people understand, for example, what is open data, what is big data, if they don't know and fully understand what data is in the first place. And we believe that data can be an attitude more than a matter of skills and tools. We can find data all around us and become collectors in our days. And once you know how to gather data and collect it, it changes your perception of the world. So data can definitely become, or is already, a new form of language. Data is an ubiquitous and ever more present language that, if properly contextualized, we can use to write definitely more personal and intimate narrative. We like to say that in our correspondence, we didn't speak English or Italian, but we definitely spoke data. And with this project, we are also highlighting that you don't need fancy programs or incredibly data analysis skills to embrace the data world. If we want to be radical, we can say that ultimately all you need is a pencil. And, well, yes, it was painful, it was laborious, demanding, frustrating, and sometimes it took hours to get the postcard done, especially when you, as I often did, over-detail your data collection. And think about that. You can't undo. You just can't. It's so upsetting when a postcard is coming up nicely and then you make a mistake and you have to start from scratch. But there is a value in spending time with your data. In this specific project, it was a process of discovery about ourselves, and by hand counting the data, analyzing it manually, we got to know our data and ourselves at a deeper level. But maybe in general, we all have to spend more time with our data. I'm not suggesting you to draw your personal data, or, well, you can definitely do it, and the library is a nice place to start doing that, or to find a pen pal across the ocean. And it is, of course, not imaginable that in our profession we all hand-draw our data. But experimentation of this kind, where we radically limit ourselves and we drastically limit our tools and possibilities, can teach us a lot about the perspective, all of the perspective we look at all kinds of data from. Because if you think about it, even when we work with big data, the whole point is making it more meaningful, more contextual. It's actually all about making it smarter and smaller, understandable. So for sure, data is not only a matter of technology, it's mostly a matter of how we collect, process, and relate with information. Well, Dear Data was a personal project that led to many exhibitions and eventually to a book, as you all know. And as Eleanor anticipated, I'm so honored to announce that the collection of the original postcard is being acquired by, as part of the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art, which we couldn't be happier about. But besides my personal immense joy for this, most of all, the project has been so well received, incredibly well received. We have seen hundreds and hundreds of postcards made by people who learned about the project and wanted to experiment on themselves. And also teachers of any grade are using the Dear Data format to teach their primary or secondary school students to approach the world of data. Again, it has opened the idea of data to a wider audience. It has been it made it more approachable, more understandable, and more easily relatable to their daily life. Which isn't the ultimate goal of what we as professionals who work with data aim to do here, like to try to speak beyond our closed room? This is really why I believe we have to reclaim a personal approach to how all kind of data is captured, analyzed, and displayed. In any story or project with data where we want our audience to truly engage and to truly relate. So to conclude, lately I've started to play with this concept that I'm calling data humanism, that I see as a new renaissance in a way, where we should, again, try to question the impersonality of a merely technological approach to data and begin designing ways to reconnect numbers to what they really stand for, which are our behaviors, our stories, our lives. Because the more ubiquitous data becomes, the more we need to experiment with how to make it more contextual and intimate and personal. And the way we visualize it is really crucial because it's the key to translating numbers into concepts that we can relate to. And I believe this is the direction that we need to go. I still don't have a 10-word definition for this data humanism, but I'm dreaming of a world where data is really for everybody and unique to anyone. A data land where talking about data will mean talking about its intimate quality in conversations that will be shaped around subjective, imperfect, and even serendipitous aspects, where data conventions are replaced by data possibilities, where hopefully data-driven design may be replaced to design-driven data, where data will be used more in conjunction to the word people than to the word numbers, and where ultimately, instead of using data to become more efficient, we will try to use data to hopefully become more humane. And I believe it will be fun to build this place, and I hope you'll find it exciting too. Thank you for now.
Hi. When
Hi.
you're collecting the data, how do you do it without it constantly stopping you from living your life?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. I think you need to be creative. So, for example, the very first week we thought that we would hand write all kind of data in a Moleskine, but then after day 2, we realized it was just insane. And so what we would do is like try to mesh up like different kind of apps. So, for example, I would use Evernote, which is just a noting application, and then sometimes just the Notes app. Then some other times I would just like write on pieces of paper things that I would need to remember to log. And then at the end of the day, or like after a few hours when I was in the situation to really properly reorganize my data, I would do that. And I always also tell this story. Sometimes you, of course, need to rely on your memories. Or when I was like with my boyfriend walking in the winter in New York, and I needed to track something, but I couldn't like kind of like pull out my gloves because it was freezing. I would tell him like, please remember that I need to log that. So you just need to be creative. And I mean, of course, I'm pretty sure that we forgot something, but I mean, our data was really human-made. And sometimes we would have even what we call data voids. Like, for example, Stefanie had more than me. Some moments where she was like so like having fun at a party that she completely forgot to track. But this is telling. So even the lack of data is telling something, you know, about yourself and your story. So, well, yeah, different kind of application. There is one application, I don't know if you're familiar with that is called Reporter, that is by Nicholas Felton, who is one of the most famous quantified self-person. And that actually helps you setting up questions that then you can also set alarms for on your phone for the question to pop up and just answer. And then automatically you can export a spreadsheet out of that. So it's called Reporter, and it's very useful.
Yeah, I was just curious how you chose what sort of things to look at. Did you sit down at the beginning of the year and sort of come up with a list, or?
Yeah, so at the very beginning, we shared a spreadsheet, a list of possible topics, and so we started by like following what we decided to in the very beginning of the week, so we decided ahead. But then the more the project evolved, the more we would just like text each other on a Saturday, on a Sunday, and really decide together what we would feel like tracking. I remember that in the beginning, the topic were all pretty cold, very much related to our activities, so like the things we bought and so on. But the more we really understood the power of like knowing about the other person through our data, the more our data set became personal. And also, yeah, I think that we also wanted to have a variety of typology of topics, so activities, thoughts, things that you own, because like we not only did survey our wardrobes or closets, but also like our beauty products, our books, and all kind of things. And then these performative weeks where it was kind of like a competition, like who smiled more to stranger. There was another one which was like being nicer, so more nice than you would have been. So this kind of topic. So I think that in the beginning we thought we would follow these 52 weeks, but then we realized that it was much more natural to agree upon the topic every week.
Why did you start Dear Data?
Wow. That's a very, very nice question. Thank you. Well, in our community, like the people who work with data, Stefanie and I really share this unique way of working by hand with data. And we thought that it was very important to try to bring this approach even bring this approach a little further, because normally the drawings with data would be just an intermediate step, and then we would, in our day job, just create the digital version. But we really wanted the data drawing to be the final output. And also, I mean, if you think about it, it's really, really nice to have this like weekly gift from the other person in the mailbox. It's like really receiving a gift, because we spend so much time crafting our card. It was our way to say, I'm spending time with you, even if we were so far apart. Thank you for your question.
May I ask if one of the hallmarks that I understand about that characterizes data is its objectivity? Did you ever have someone else monitor you and collect the data and give it back to you?
No, I have never had. What we did, though, in the data, there was a week where we tracked our partners, and so we kind of like did track somebody else. And at the end of the week, we would also just share the data with the other person. So it was week 29 when we both, tracked. Actually, let me take a step back. We only shared the topic for every week. So then every one of us, each one of us, like came up with her way of approaching the topic, right? So one week was our boyfriend, like boyfriend and husband. And we both, even without telling the other person, actually tracked the feeling of annoyance and the feelings of kind appreciations that our partner, inspired us. And we both have very, very similar postcards, but actually the feelings of feeling positive about what the other person did definitely outcome the annoyance, the annoying feeling. And I think that this is also very important, because you give so much for granted what the other person, the person you live with, does for you, and you kind of like tend to really just focus on the thing that irritates you. But by having to count, for example, all of the time that he was like carrying stuff for me, open the door for me, or just like listen to my rants without, even the times where I sort of like realized, well, now it should definitely get mad at me, but it didn't. But by having to count them on another person, or like even things like he let me hit like from his plate with my hands, like stuff that, if you don't have to count them, you just give them for granted. So, well, I think I didn't really answer to your question, but I monitored my partner. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
You mentioned that other groups have taken this model and used it in different formats. And, well, it occurred to me to use it. I've worked for 40 years in healthcare, and data has moved in a lot. But I think this might make it much more useful data if we could find ways to implement this in that kind of setting. So how have other people adapted this and used it?
That's very interesting. I think that like mostly the people that now are drawing their data, I believe, are people that really want to be creative in their life, but probably in their day job, they don't really have the opportunity to do that. And also people that want to discover specific aspects of themselves. So basically, this is the things that I believe move people the most. And I'm definitely also amazed by the kind of different topics that people would collect data on. Not only, so some of the people are following our 52 topics, but some others are really just like experimenting. So we had a lot of people that try to track their dreams, for example, or so that's interesting. So this is one part, people that are drawing their data for getting to know better themselves, or to also just like try to be creative. And well, if you think about the success of the coloring books for adults, and then, I don't want to go into details about that, but I think that people really want to be creative, and they want to be doing that without having to fear the blank page. Because if you have to just like draw on a blank page with no structure, it would definitely be harder than, for example, drawing your data, because you start from quantities and you start from things that you counted. And that's one thing. The other thing that we are very happy about are teachers. And so teachers of any kind of grade are really using this thing to, I think, also to get, not only to get their students to know the word of data, but also to use it as a tool to get a little more empathy on a class, right? Because things are personal. And another thing that it's kind of like very on my eyes is that young kids are the perfect people, because kids are already like natural collectors, right? And they love to draw. So why not collecting and drawing their data? So that's the thing that is happening. But to your point, I think that like healthcare would definitely benefit a lot by people who can collect their data in a more active way, because I know that now there are a lot of applications that can track parameters about your health, but if you're able to contextualize these logs, like for example, not only having your blood pressure or whatever parameter changes about you, but also what happened in that moment, how did you feel? Was it a special moment? Did you have another thought? I mean, I think that that over time could really benefit for a overall, like, well-being.
Hi, I'm in the back. I was really struck by the example you showed of the scarf, whose pattern had to do with malaria data. And I think it seems like if, data humanism is something we're striving towards, we might want to think about ways to interact with data that aren't just on a screen or a page, but are tactile, or we encounter them in the world. So can you talk about that project a little bit, or other ones that bring data off of a screen or page?
Yeah, there are a lot of data artists that are trying already to use data to, in a way, make physical objects. So the Malaria No More project was a really, really interesting one for their 10th year anniversary. A 10th year anniversary of their study of malaria. They collected all of the data about the fact that actually malaria really, the number of deaths for malaria really decreases a lot over time, and they felt that they were not really able to communicate it so powerfully, and so they had me and another 3 data artists to try to make this very tangible. And also what we did is we partnered up with like local craft communities, and so the scarf that you saw was actually built by local people from places that are more affected by malaria. And I used that as a kind of like another constraint, because their technique was embroidery, and they only have this kind of like I don't know the name in English, but the thing to produce this scarf that was this actual dimension. And so everything that they were already doing for me was a constraint to try to find a creative way to use data as a material to visualize it. So I think that, of course, these are experiments and explorations, but again, it is another way to bring data to a wider audience. Because like if you buy a scarf and then you realize that this is data and there's a data story there, I think you start to find the world of data less cold, less impersonal, and more approachable. So yeah, I believe that all of the kind of experimentation that we can do to get people more comfortable with the whole idea of data, the better.
Yeah, so you had started talking about your background being in architecture, and then you morphed into information design.
Yeah.
Anytime during this project, have you thought of yourself as an artist? Because I definitely see that in your work, and obviously the MoMAs recognize that, and maybe there's room for a data artist in the world.
This is such delicate things, because like in our community, there's always like a lot of people trying to define the boundaries between art and design. What is data art and what is data visualization design? What is less scientific? What is more scientific? I myself personally, and it's just my 2 cents, I'm more interested in getting these boundaries more fuzzy than more defined. I believe that Dear Data can be art, it can be design. I think that to me it's a project that explores new ways of relating with information and new ways to make information accessible and personal. I believe that also, sometimes there's really no point to me in clearly defining what is art and what design. So to me, Dear Data is design because we found constraints from ourselves, and so we set up really clear boundaries. So it's 52 postcards. There are like clear constraints about how we do with the format, and we designed the format, and then we designed the data collection, and we designed the way to visualize it. Probably is art because you see these visual representations that you can probably relate to the word of art. But I'm curious to like ask you a question. Why does this question came to your mind? So is there something specific that you think about the distinction between design and art, and what should be art and what should be design?
Sure. Two things. I always see Facebook ads about data scientists, so I was just like thinking it would be funny if people were talking about data artists, because I think it is impactful, you know, in everyday life, what you're doing. I was more asking you just personally if you thought of yourself as an artist. Regardless of the data, I think that they all blend together. There doesn't have to be a distinction, but yeah, this is quite impressive work here, and yeah, I think it like falls definitely in that realm of being an artist. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think I'm a designer.
Fair enough.
Hello. I was wondering, all the way back here.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. Throughout the whole process, from the beginning of the project to all the way through publishing the book, for you, what did you think, like specifically or generally, the most challenging part of the whole thing?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of the question? What did I think was the what?
For you, what was the most challenging part of the whole thing?
The challenging part. Yeah, I think that, okay, over the year of the data collection, sometimes, well, collecting data can really get in the way of your life. So sometimes it was really hard to really be focusing on collecting data where there are stuff that goes on in your life, but we were so committed to this project and we didn't want to let the other person down. So even though sometimes it was really taxing and demanding, we could stick to the project because we made each other accountable. But sometimes this was really hard. So I remember, for example, a week of indecisions. We're tracking indecisions. I was going through a very specific period of my life where my very old grandfather was about to pass away, and I was so undecided whether to take a flight back to Italy and to say him a last goodbye. But in the end, I didn't. But I remember that week having to track my indecision every time. Then they popped up in the most undecisive week of my year. I felt that it was just too much. Really, sometimes I think that it was just too much. This is one thing. Another thing about the year is sometimes you would run out of visual ideas. We wanted our cards to form a very, in a way, heterogeneous collection, and we wanted to try to be original every time. But I really remember that by the end of the project, I felt I've tried everything. What can I do with this data? And so what I would do is probably I would get out and get a walk and get inspirations by other fields. So another challenge was really to not repeat yourself in terms of visual design. And then I think that once we got contacted by our publishers, to me, the challenge was trying to understand how to make this project enjoyable for people. And so I think that the book is made out of the project. So it's really based on our 104 cards. But then it's also really filled with anecdote that hopefully people can relate to, with thoughts about the data world. So we didn't want the book just to be the commemoration of our year. And it was really challenging in the beginning to try to, in a way, to move away from the data drawing and to try to make a book that is actually a real book, since both neither Stefanie and I are writers, so we are designers, data visualization designers. So I believe that working on the book was a challenge. Also because, and this is and then I'm done with the question, because we're two very strong-minded designers. And if you think about that, the project, the Dear Data project, was a collaboration, but it was a parallel collaboration, right? We wouldn't really step into each other's toes because we were doing the same thing, but parallelly. But having to design a book together was really a challenge. And I now I'm laughing because we really literally now have a spreadsheet of all of the things that we hate about each other's design, the fonts that we hate about each other's, the fact that, she hates the fact that I always kind of tilt everything a little bit, it's kind of, but we needed to do that to make that clear, otherwise it would be impossible. But I'm so happy that we managed to get the book out. Yeah.
Do you always use pencils, or sometimes is it markers?
Actually, my favorite material is the, I can tell the name of a brand, right? We can say brands, yeah. The Muji pen 0.7 is kind of a particular ink pen by Muji that I feel it's really fantastic because I really like the trace of that. So in a lot of my cards, the base shapes are traced with this pen. And then every time we would use like different kind of pencils, markers, water markers. And sometimes over the year, we also like challenge ourselves to experiment with collage, for example. And so like cutting little pieces from a newspaper or some colored paper to make them elements to visualize our data. But my favorite material to draw is pen. I prefer pens, like this kind of particular pens, to pencils. It's just personal. I like the feeling of tracing with this pen.
As soon as you decided on what data you were going to quantify in any given week, did it take a process of experimentation to figure out a visual schematic, or was that sort of immediately intuitive for you?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I want to start from a little, I'll be real quick, but also want to start from a little behind. When I decided the topic, one thing that I needed to do is also figuring out what I was interested in exploring about the topic. And so before even getting to start collecting my data, I will set up questions for myself. So for example, in some of the week that you've seen, like about complaints. So what is interesting about complaints? How many times you complain? What is the topic of your complaints? Who do you complain to? Or do you really needed to complain, or was it like, avoidable? And that are questions that you need to set up in the beginning, right? So then every time that you kind of like feel that you're about to complain, you know what to fill out. And then sometimes in the beginning of the week, I thought that the most interesting story to visualize was actually one that it ended up not being so interesting in the end. So what I would do after 7 weeks of data collection, I would really again, spend time looking at my data, like printing out things if they were digitally collected, and really trying to understand if they were patterns or kind of like interesting stories. And from there, I started to understand what was the best way to visualize them. For example, sometimes it was chronological because it was interesting to give Stefanie an idea of how these things evolved through the week. Some other times it was definitely more interesting to aggregate, for example, data per categories. And so I think that to answer your question, the first entry point to the data visualization for me is the most interesting story. And then I try every time, even in my work, to get visual inspirations from fields that are not data visualization, like from not existent data visualization. So I'm definitely a lot attracted by abstract art because of the composition and juxtaposition of the symbols, but also by the aesthetic of music notation or by scientific drawings. And sometimes when I had the data in my mind, so like I already analyzed the data, I would just like lose myself in images, and then I started to see data in the images that I was looking at, and then it's just, there's a lot of intuition in what I'm trying to describe by words, but yeah, that was pretty much the process. Last one.
So I was wondering if whatever data you're collecting impacts your mood. So the weeks that you're collecting,
Yes.
how many smiles you get back. Did you feel like that was a more joyful week? And then when you're collecting data about how many times you were annoyed with something, was that a week that you then felt yourself like how did it impact your mood, what the data was that you were collecting?
Yeah, absolutely. Stefanie and I 100% agreed that the more cheerful weeks, like for example, we had a week where we tracked our laughters or our positive thoughts or our feeling of gratitude, these kind of weeks really impacted our mood in a very positive way, because of course you're forced to acknowledge the positive things that are popping up in your mind, so definitely. Also some other weeks that required us to really pay attention to our surroundings, such as like we had a week where we mapped the sound that we heard or the smells that we felt. Also, this kind of week were very positive because you were kind of like forced to be outside of your bubble of thoughts in a way. While all of the weeks when we tracked like our envies, our negative thoughts, our obsessions, they impacted our mood in a negative way. But just to finish on that, I believe that they were important week as well, because at the end of the week, we really truly had a record of things that you wouldn't really want to notice otherwise. So, but yes, definitely, the kind of data that you collect impacts a lot your mood.
So you mentioned that kind of for people who are intimidated by the white page, having the kind of foundation of the data that you've collected can be really helpful as a place to start. But you also mentioned that even you had trouble sometimes coming up with ways to represent that data. So how would you, or what advice would you give to people starting out as how to just start putting that data
yeah,
on
no,
the page?
definitely. I think what I meant is like after 52 weeks where we wanted to have each postcard looking different than the other one, it was kind of like sometimes frustrating because you didn't want to repeat yourself, right? So that was what I was mentioning. I believe that one easy way to start really drawing your data when you have a data set is just like to start to visually count what you have. So for example, if you have let's say 50 logs plus their attribution, first of all, you make 50 dots or 50 tally marks. And then you start to add very tiny and small and, I don't know, even simple attributes. It can even be just like circling one in red and circling the other in yellow according to some categories that you set up in the beginning. And then you started to add, for example, 1 dot or 2 dots if a condition happened or not. So really starting in a very easy way, because I believe that not necessarily a data drawing should be an incredible, beautiful drawing. It should be something that helps you see what's in the data more than in an actual spreadsheet. So I would suggest to start simple, and a very, very easy way to organize data is to organize it chronologically. It can really be one after the other, or really mapping and like crossing the day of the week and the hour. So starting easy to then feel more confident to like push forward and experiment more.
So thank you very, very much.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.